Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Beer Guys and the Sounds in Cinema podcast. Mike and Tom are washing their mouths out with soap because the Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language. Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel podcast. This is the Spider-Man edition. Today we're talking Spider-Man 2. Michael Shantz here of the How Dare You Awards. Joining me, the man aiming his web right at my face, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Say hello to everyone, Tom.
It rides up in the crotch a little bit too.
I love that scene. That scene was fully improvised. They did 25 takes and took the first take.
Yeah, well, there's so much to admire about it. I admire how well a movie like this handles comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's comparative to other movies where the comedy is, lets them down.
Yeah.
But also, awkward comedy is done very well,
Right.
which is
yeah.
Extra hard to do.
Sure.
And it's something that that you'll see in any mainstream franchise movie now, and it's always botched. And here is a masterclass in how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most interesting things about the way Sam Raimi films comedy in this film, which seems counterintuitive, but it's actually, if you know anything about comedy filmmaking, it's not. That whenever we have a comic sequence, everything is in camera.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
In real time. So it puts it on the level of silent films,
Mm-hmm.
or cartoons.
Right.
Like that's the level that you're working at. It's Buster Keaton, it's Laurel Hardy. And a lot of that is because you choose not to edit.
I was just going to say the same thing, because you don't...
Just film the joke.
Yeah, because you don't just film the joke, and you don't edit into a reaction or into the, into an eyebrow raise or a wink, or, you know what I mean? It's just, the joke's the joke.
And he does that again.
And the joke is always good enough to just be in camera, by the way, so...
Yeah, and they work on the execution of the joke, and they slow everything down so you're just watching it in real time.
Yeah.
And that's a big reason as to why the comedy in this film more or less works every single time.
Agreed.
And it's a good job because there's a lot of it.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of slapstick in this film.
So much. But for me, I mean, it's one of the shining lights too. I mean, it's just one of those. Yeah. It's one of the reasons this movie works as well as it does. And to that point, this movie has 93% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow,
that's a big number, and
it is a big number.
It's one of the huge, kind of. When what was it, 1995, I think, is Waterworld, and it was a $200 million budget for a picture, and everybody was out of their minds with I can't believe that. And here we are in 2004, budgeted $200 million without really kind of blinking an eye. It was just after the success of Spider-Man, it was, this is a foregone conclusion. You're going to get an opening weekend of 88.1 and gather 373.5 million. And at the beginning, in the aughts, as we'll say, the early aughts, this is, where a worldwide market really comes into play, because, in the world, $788.9 million.
And that, I always think that this is a really good movie for international distribution, because so much of it is visual.
Yeah.
Like you I don't say you don't need the dialogue, but you could get by without knowing what was being said on screen. you know,
But that's
Sam
not to
Raimi. Sam
say
Raimi is a visual
he
communicator,
is, but
and this is an extremely visual movie.
it's an extremely visual movie, but that's not to say the one thing that this movie does so well that Spider-Man 3 doesn't, or at least doesn't as successfully as this movie, you know, there's writing in this movie in which the characters have arcs, it all makes sense, there's good acting going on,
Phenomenal acting.
and all of that's within a whole lot of spectacle. And
Yes.
with movies with big spectacle like this one, at least for me as a movie going audience member, you know, I remember that stuff, but what I really latch on to are those great acting moments and the character arcs, and those are the things that end up mattering
Mm.
and actually making it a good movie. It's the difference between this being at 93% and the next movie being, you know, I think it's 63%, and that's generous.
Yeah.
You know.
They're both generous, let's face it.
All right, yeah, okay, you know, maybe, you know, you might not think this is a 93% movie.
No, I definitely
probably agree with you, but I think I like this movie a little more than you. And
maybe.
As previously stated, it's directed by Sam Raimi. And if you know movies, you know Sam Raimi, of course, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, Darkman, and then he something like as quirky and silly and but fun as Quick and the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into movies that I just love, like A Simple Plan and Drag Me to Hell, or even, you know, maybe not love it as much, but an outlier like For Love of the Game. He directs a baseball movie. You know, Sam Raimi directs a baseball movie. It's weird.
It is, yeah, absolutely. Bubba Toe Hep as well.
Yeah.
Put that in there. Yeah, he's this is an outstanding exhibition of his talents.
Yeah.
As a filmmaker in virtually every area.
Mm-hmm.
But chief among them for me is that ability to paint the CGI into the screen. Just because we've seen so many examples of directors who are wholly
who just
incapable
cannot
of
do that. One thing I read that I found wholly fascinating was how proud some of the visual effects people were. I think I started mentioning it in our ranking episode. They were so proud of the scene in which they're cutting off the Doc Ock's arms, the doctors.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they themselves, upon watching the movie, couldn't figure out what was practical and what was digital.
Yeah, and that's it.
And that says really all you need to know about how effects are used in this movie overall.
Definitely, and it's a rare treat to have that. You know, that is the ultimate goal of effects in 2022.
Right. I mean, we
talked before about how Terminator 2.
I was just going to say, yeah, because we've been talking about this
90s.
Standard that Terminator 2 said about that other films just don't follow.
But you know, a lot of that was born out of necessity, and you know,
that's
as soon
true.
as James Cameron gets his hands on
all that he can muster,
he goes fucking nuts and forgets he was ever a storyteller. But here, you know, we even with, like you say, without putting too fine a point on it, everything kind of looks seamless and is literally because the design and the cinematography is so good that every element on the screen is subject to that.
And I think we were talking about
that sheen of brilliance that they do. He does things with color and lighting, or his cinematographers as well. Do things with color and lighting in this movie that I've never seen done with computer generated imagery before or since.
Yeah.
And it's such a, I don't know, it's, to me, it would be such a lesson to other people who have like films with a lot of effects in. It's like, take the emphasis off the effects.
Mm-hmm.
Let them just be part of what's happening
on screen, part of the story,
work on everything else.
Yes.
Yes. Like bump up everything else to a new level.
Yeah.
And it'll kind of take care of itself. I mean, that's the lesson I learned from this film.
I read something about this movie that surprised me, then shocked me, then made me really ponder, which was the
Yeah.
last effect of Doc Ock falling into the harbor, drowning,
Yeah.
is completely digital.
Wow. Yeah.
And when I hear that, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But in the whatever dozen times I've seen this movie, I've never thought of that once.
No, no.
I never am watching him sink to the bottom of the ocean floor thinking that's a digital effect. Never.
Well, to quote Bruce Campbell in this film, it helps maintain the illusion.
Boy, does he know how to give a cameo.
Yeah. Cameo King.
Oh, I love him in this movie.
Yeah.
The shoelace, the tie, then
Yeah.
stop. Where do you think you're going? Oh, I'm afraid. The pointing to both signs, all of it. I just think it's a brilliant piece of comedy, and I like the one in the third one less, but
But because of the
but be,
the comparative quality,
yeah,
it's the highlight of the film.
exactly. I remember thinking it's one of the best things in the film.
Yeah. But you also
The
get the sense
lesser of
that
the Campbell cameos.
the lesser of the Campbell cameos, you also get the sense they're leaning on him more heavily to bring the goods
Yeah,
than,
yes,
than in this
yes,
film.
absolutely. Oh, all right. Well, let's start at the beginning. For one, this is the only Spider-Man movie, I believe, out of any Spider-Man movie that's won an Academy Award, Best Visual Effects.
Well,
So,
it's well earned.
and yeah, exactly. It's well earned.
Or I would change that to best disguising of visual effects.
Yeah.
That's have yet to come to fruition.
Well, let's start where you like to start. We got the credits here, pointy credits. I wrote down. But
the title sequence is magnificent.
So, do we have a new Imbass here?
What, the drawn recap montage?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's been done before or since, but well, I mean, the next movie does it as well. But oddly, you know, if you want to, if you,
those are just stills.
I know if you want to see the difference between the two films,
Yeah.
you can see
Yeah.
how well it's done here and how clumsily it's done in the next one. Because in the next one, you're seeing all the things you saw in this one.
We've had adjacent imbasses, which is the animated recap sequence.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm thinking of Weekend at Bernie's too.
Yeah.
But these are, this is specifically comic book graphic.
Right.
Comic book graphic retellings, and
that was my note. I said we're keeping a comic theme, but
yeah.
we have sort of this impasse of a recap montage.
Definitely, So it goes back to the origins and the roots of the series in comic books, and the master.
But it's satisfying as opposed to when Ang Lee does it in the Hulk, because he's doing it throughout the narrative in a way that always made me. Not the Hulk, I guess it's just Hulk, right? But anyway.
Yeah.
I found it deeply unsatisfying in this movie, and it works so well in this movie.
Okay, we'll agree to disagree. But what I
So you liked that, did you?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I'm a sucker for split screen. Just throw that out. No more comments.
Very good then. We'll moving on.
No, well, just before we do, the masterstroke for me is the use of the spider web as a panel.
Yeah, right.
As the lines of the panel. And I mean, that's such a good piece of graphic design.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And, this is I've already said this, but Danny Elfman's score, it's definitely got the flavor of his Batman scores. But it's also modern and sleek. More choral. Well, maybe not more choral than Batman Returns, but there's a heavy choir on this one too. And it's kind of got that ominous feel that you associate with the Hans Zimmer Batman movies, but prior to that. So obviously, like, Danny Elfman is both thinking similarly and differently about superhero scores, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still very recognizably a Danny Elfman score, and I love that
Right.
aspect of it too.
And then one of the things, I guess because he's so like right at the top where Peter Parker is on his little motor scooter and he's trying to get to work at his pizza shop.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first characters you see is his boss, who is played by Asif Manvi.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my notes is, like, what a deep bench this movie has.
Oh my god. Literally have that note.
It's unbelievable.
Deep bench of 90s, 2000 character actors.
Yeah.
Bill Nunn, Dylan
Dylan
Baker.
Baker. We got
It's
Elizabeth Banks.
Elizabeth Banks, yeah. It's
Elia
it's
Baskin,
staggering.
you know,
Yeah.
revisiting us from 2010.
And then so you got what's really great is like you've got those, you know, you've got that deep bench of character actors. You've got like actors who, you know, were up and coming at the time, Tobey Maguire, James Franco, Kirsten
right.
Dunst. And then you've got people who actors who only exist in this time period. That's like the third element of it. There's you've got one of the the daughter of one of the neighbors is the anorexic woman from the Christina Aguilera "Beautiful" video.
Okay.
You know,
yeah.
it's
Right.
Who was also in that episode of A Shield where she played a prostitute.
Yeah.
You know,
I was gonna say I remember her from The Shield.
It's like so, you know, so in that moment, and I love the fact that her brother who's sitting at the table, I assume it's her brother who never speaks.
Mm-hmm.
Is Skip from season 2 of The Sopranos, Pussy Bompancero's
Oh
FBI handler.
That's right.
And I just love the historicity of movies almost as much as I love the timelessness.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that, you know, the main cast of this movie would grace any movie in 2022. In fact, you know, we need that kind of cast again, but but also, you know, you've got these characters who only exist in this historical moment in time, and I love that as well.
Sure. Well, and you know, I mean, kind of speaking to the deep bench while simultaneously talking about something else we've talked about, which is, you know, you mentioned in our ranking episode when Jonah J mentions Doctor Strange, and that's all you need.
Yeah.
And so this movie's got that, but it also has, you know, say a character like Dr. Kurt Connor that Dylan Baker plays. And once you see like that arm cut off, you know exactly who that, or I don't know, at least I do. I know that he's going to be, that he could someday become the villain that he becomes.
Oh, I don't know anything about that.
Oh, so yeah, he's the lizard guy.
Oh.
That character.
But they never got there.
But they just never got there.
Oh.
But, you know, those are the things that I like about...
Explains why they cast Dylan Baker in such an innocuous role.
Exactly, right. But those are the things that I like about this movie in particular, where, you know, those things are there for an audience to find, but we're not...
Yeah.
You know, we don't wedge them into a D or an E story because we're that far down the pike, which is what happens in Spider-Man 3.
Well, that's it, and you know, it's an optional pleasure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think we're learning that is all you need.
Yeah, right.
And
then
obviously, you know, it's this opening sequence is full of all this broad physical visual comedy that's expertly timed and executed. But it also makes clear to me from the outset that this is all taking place in the real world, and to me, you know, when his boss removes the sticker from his hat. Or his helmet. Is it his helmet?
Yeah, his helmet. Stripping him of his badge, essentially.
And it half... Yeah. And there's something about the way it half comes off.
Yeah.
That reminds me, we're not in like a comic book superhero reality. This is the real world.
Sure.
And the other comparable moment for me is the time it takes for him to remove the climbing rope from the
Yeah.
pizzas when he
when
delivers
he
it.
when he
They
finds
really
out
take
that
that
he's failed.
moment.
Yes.
Yeah, they really take that moment, and it puts the
I've never been
superhero in
able to
this.
quite figure out how he got into that closet.
No, well, it's a bit, isn't it? And
It's
it's a
really just a
beautiful
bit,
bit.
but
Yeah. uh, it's it's mining the superhero for comedy, but it's also mining it a la Superman 3, but it's also mining it for the quotidian, like
Mhm.
let's have a superhero in an everyday reality doing something banal as
As
delivering
delivering
pizzas,
pizzas,
and
sure.
yeah,
Well, and
and
you've talked about this,
not doing a very good job of it,
not
which
doing
is
a good job
lovely.
of it. You talked about this before. I mean, I certainly as recently as the Star Wars series, when you're taking your heroes down a peg.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, I mean, Spider-Man is Spider-Man, and he's a hero, but Peter Parker is a young, he's just removed from being a teenager, right?
yeah, and
And
yeah,
so
exactly.
he's got all the problems that we all had at that age, where you're broke, you have a small shitty apartment, you're
Yeah,
struggling to make ends meet.
it's really shitty apartment.
Yeah,
He's
you
even got a
know?
bathroom
Right.
now.
Yeah. And so all of
A
that
bum
gives
or
the
a phone that bummed me out.
yeah, no own phone. We're not quite to. That's another thing. There's between these two movies, even in 2007, there's a lot of characters with flip phones in that Spider-Man 3 still. Kind of made me
and
laugh.
yet and yet there are other parts of this movie that seem like they exist in the 1930s.
Yeah. But I think that's Sam Raimi, and I think he's,
Yeah,
you
yes,
know,
that is Sam Raimi, co-writer of the Hudsucker Proxy,
yeah,
right there.
exactly. And there's a quality that he brings that is so deft in this movie, in which he's able to, as you said, I think in our ranking episode, bringing up that sort of 60s kind of Batman,
Yeah,
idea. He's able to bring in the Spider-Man kind of theme song from the cartoon
yeah.
in interesting ways that he also did in the first movie. And all of that plays on a level that, it kind of, it's interesting that this movie can play on a level in which it's absolutely rooted in the real world, but also still kind of feels like the Dick Tracy movie.
It's
And that's a
I
tightrope to walk that Sam Raimi gives
Mike,
this movie.
Mike. I also made the comparison to Dick
Did
Tracy,
you?
but in relation, specifically in relation to J.K. Simmons's J.J.
Oh, love
Because
him.
to me, so this
I think it's
to
the
me is
first movie, right? It's the he has one of my favorite all-time lines when I think Peter asks him, "Isn't there anybody you trust?" He says, "Trust my barber."
it's great. Just the performance is the to me, and this speaks to exactly what you say about it exists both in the real world and out of it.
Yeah,
Um, it's the perfect hybrid of live action and comic book
yeah,
performance.
right.
And this is what they were going for in Dick Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
And they used a hell of a lot of makeup and prosthetics to try and make it
Sure.
happen. And yet J.K. Simmons manages it with minimal makeup and
Right.
costume and pretty much just
Acting.
right?
Yeah.
But I mean, this performance is something else because he even moves like he's like a moving comic book panel.
Yeah.
Like even the way he moves his body looks like when your eyes are following the
A
panels in
page.
a comic
Yeah,
book.
right. Yeah.
I don't know how they achieve. I mean, it's just wonderful work. I don't really know how they achieved it. And again, it's one of those before or since situations
Mm-hmm.
where Dick Tracy didn't quite get there,
No,
and no
right.
one has seemingly ever got there since. But this is. Then there's a couple of characters in The Walking Dead that get pretty close, and it's really the only kind of graphic novel I know. But
Mm-hmm.
I've heard actors who've worked on that show talk about really trying to put on screen what they saw in the
In the
panel.
panels.
Xander Berkeley, who was also in Terminator 2,
Yeah.
John Connor's foster father, he talks about just
Don't have to
trying
remind
get,
me, sir.
trying to get the look, where he plays a character who's hanged at one point, and he
Yeah.
wanted to get the exact
Look.
expression
Yeah.
that he saw in the comic book. So obviously that's something about doing comic book adaptations that's clearly a part of the acting discipline.
That's
But
interesting.
J.K. Simmons is just nailing it in a way that I just never encountered
Right.
ever again.
So one thing I want to ask you about, because we gave a little play to whatever Michael Chabon, Chabon.
Shaban.
Uh,
Uh,
we were talking about the writing of the film,
yeah.
and one thing I noticed between this movie and the third movie, I mean, I'm not going to say that this movie is run like a Swiss clock, like we were talking about with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, or Bogus Journey, rather. But like you had said, I think in our ranking episode, that there's a real kind of idea of writing behind it. And I can see machinations of, I know exactly when the first act ends. 34 minutes, 17 minutes into this movie, we're all caught up. We have the new characters, we have the old characters, we know where they are,
True.
what's going on in their lives, what is in front of them, what's the obstacle in front of them. We know all of that. And 34 minutes in, we're going to get done with the first act. And an hour later, we're done with the second act, and then we're going to have the finale. I can see all the machinations behind it in the writing. I mean, is it there for you on that level, or?
Yeah, it's there for me on that level, absolutely.
Okay.
There's three distinct acts.
Right.
I think what you're talking about in terms of like coming out of the last film into this new story, they do that really efficiently. A birthday party is a great way to reintroduce the legacy cast.
Sure.
I really respect the screenplay on the level of, we're starting a brand new storyline, but we're also continuing on a storyline from the last film.
Yeah.
And I think this film does really well to make them interweave organically, without ever feeling like it's like a gear change, like you stop one story and start another.
Yeah.
It all feels like it's running as one. The parallel storylines are intersecting at just the right
the right times, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I love all that, but where I think there are writing problems in this film is something that is very specific to Chabon and the way he writes screenplays, because I've seen it in Star Trek Picard, of which he is the showrunner for. And I'm borrowing this term from Matt Myra from Star Trek The Next Conversation, because it's too good not to. The problem he has is restacking.
Oh, wow.
That he will write a scene in this film. I think it's any scene involving Aunt May. He'll write a scene that will take you so far, and rather than moving on from that point, he'll give you another scene which does exactly the same thing, or another type of scene that is exactly the same. So, for instance, in this film, all the Aunt May stuff you could do in 2 to 3 scenes, and it's about 7 or 8.
Yeah. Because really the only important one is his confessing about his uncle.
And one of the biggest problems with Star Trek Picard is that they set up the story in the first episode. You have a finale at the end of the 10, however many episodes, and in between it's just restacking the same information again and again and again in different ways. So you don't actually have anything but 2 episodes at the end, each end of the season. The problem here in a cinematic screenplay is that it weighs down what to me is an already sagging midsection of this film, and it just kind of
I had that kind of the same note, because that, like I said, that second act is a good hour.
Right, and we just reiterating the same information again and again and again.
Right.
and that bit of the movie is already sagging a little under its own weight. And I think this really and we build up such a good momentum in the first third of the film,
Right. And
and then and so by the time you get to the final third of the film, a lot of that's been squandered by this really dense second act.
okay, yeah.
Um,
I will completely,
and
yeah, I don't
that's
disagree with that.
so there's a problem with there's a problem with pacing, and there's a problem with storytelling, but that's the limits of it, really. I'm not going to go. But I that to me really is a Chabon special.
Interesting.
That's that killed off that way of writing, killed off Star Trek Picard. But I mean, he's a high profile, really respected novelist. I haven't got around to reading any of his books, so I'm perfectly willing to believe that he understands that medium as well as everyone says he does. But because I can see that sort of thing working quite well in a novel. But here you don't need to keep reiterating the same information. We need to be moving forward.
All right, yeah.
And he's not got a great sense of forward momentum in the way that he tells stories and writes scenes.
Well, on that tongue lashing, why don't we take a break?
That doesn't reflect, that's not a reflection on the movie overall.
I understand.
And I like the fact that the movie also kind of, where we talked about this in relation to the Star Trek films, that it having Chabon on board gives you a level of literacy.
Yeah, right.
And they play with that, the fact that there's poetry in the film. There's a play within the film, importance of being earnest.
Sure.
So it's interesting because it's based on a comic book, and you've got a novelist helping to write the script. So you're getting literacy from several
angles.
Spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a break and then we'll come back. We're off to a good start. Right after this.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had one, maybe two craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beer. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom and I are here discussing the 2004 film Spider-Man 2, directed by Sam Raimi. All right, Tom. Now, I mean, we've been talking about sort of shaping the beginning of this movie. One thing I wanted to get to, though, was within this first act, there are plenty of moments, and I guess it's interesting for me to. I feel like I'm comparing this movie a lot in this talk to Spider-Man 3 because there's direct contrasts.
Yeah,
because there's so many moments for like even just small good acting moments,
Oh yeah.
James Franco has this great moment where all he asks is, "How's the bug these days?" and that with the disdain acting he's doing in the third one,
Yeah.
which feels like an overreach. And then I also read that he was doing Pineapple Express at the same time as that movie, which made me think maybe he was spread a little thin. Because
He got that he got talked out of good acting by David Gordon Green.
yeah, maybe.
And we've seen plenty of
We've
examples
seen
of that.
plenty of examples of that. And so, it's just interesting to me that you have, as we stated, like the band's all back together and he's getting good performances in this movie and not in the next movie. And there's a disconnect for me there. I can't figure out beyond, the scope of the movies, in which the next one is just bloated all to hell. But, what is it? Why are we not even getting individual moments? Because we have really good moments in this one.
Yeah, I mean...
And to me, part of it is Raimi is allowing the actors, like we were even talking about the effects. It's in camera. Like he's just letting the camera sit on their faces. Yeah. Not cutting, not editing away. See,
true.
That kind of thing.
I mean, it also, what they're doing has much more of a solid backbone. Like the conflicts between the characters, their relationships, really make sense.
It's all, yeah, that's true.
Given where we are in the story. And even, I've got a note here about how well the melodrama is handled.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Scenes. Because it is melodrama, if you look at Aunt May, she's going through a foreclosure,
right.
She's in tears, she's financially bankrupt. This is all the stuff that, is like, can really go too far if you overcook it, as they do in the next
movie, right?
You've got all her mourning of Uncle Ben, a guy we hear more about after he's dead than when he was alive.
Were you saying just off air? Were we talking about the matter of degree, or was that on air?
Yeah, I think that was on air. And so they're just, I think, both the actors and the directors and the writer are kind of keeping it all within their grasp and not leaning too heavily into soap opera.
Yeah.
Because the story is on point.
Yeah.
It all kind of feels right. No one's straining too far in any direction to make something work.
Yeah, it just feels like the train's all headed in one direction.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
The train's on the tracks.
And that really helps when we get to the introduction of nominally our villain, Dr. Octopus. And it grounds that character in authentic emotions, in reality.
Yeah.
It's understated and nuanced. And
I was actually reading a lot about the choices that they didn't make too, because
that's it. That's all I think about when I look at Alfred Molina. I think, God. Well, you can see the road not traveled is Willem Dafoe, so it's like that's part of the genius of this. It's a great inversion of the Green Goblin, both visually and and emotionally and in acting style.
Yeah. Because one of the things they were deciding about
totally in the other
whether
direction.
or not to do, and they cut it out, was having, say, the arms speak to him and hearing their thoughts in their head. And it's that happens in this movie, but you know it from Sam Raimi's direction and Alfred Molina's acting.
And there's a direct contrast.
It's all there on screen without kind of over baking it, like you said,
Yeah, and there's another direct contrast to a contemporaneous movie, which is the second Lord of the Rings film with Gollum schizophrenia.
Yeah, right.
Which is I mean, he is a living special effect, and that is all done with editing. And it's just interesting to me that Alfred Molina does it all with just playing two different characters in the same body.
Yeah, right.
And it's completely clear
it's
which
so
one is
clear
which,
always at
and
all
what the
times.
conflict
Yeah.
is. And there's no, again, like he's surrounded by special effects and models and miniatures, and yet the film isn't actually using that to tell the story.
Yeah,
it's using him as an actor to tell the story, and it's just it might seem like an obvious choice, but a ton of movies don't do it.
Right. Yeah. And I could say the same
So
for kind of what Peter Parker Spider-Man is going through in this movie, because I've heard complaints from people in the past about this movie about, well, it's kind of unclear what's going on with him and how he's losing his powers.
no, not to me.
And I don't agree with that,
No.
because
He's got web impotence.
yeah,
I
exactly.
mean,
And
it's very clear. You just you have to it's subtext though.
yeah, exactly. But that's what I mean.
Because he can't say I
Sam
can't
Raimi's
come.
allowing,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's not the kind of movie where you go, guys, I can't come.
But when you see what's going on in his life, and you
Yeah.
know that one of the things I always loved about that first movie is the last kind of closing shot, that the idea that he's made this choice.
Yeah.
The woman of his dreams has said, I'm in love with you, and he's in love with her, but says he's not, and walks away from her to protect her. And
Yeah.
it's a springboard to this movie in a way, and I think this movie is supposed to take place a couple years later. But that
definitely, they're very specific about that.
and that means that that's 2 years of him not being able to go with his heart, and all the stress that comes with that, and stress about Aunt May, and stress about even what he did with his uncle, and sort of the guilt that he feels about that. And now he's got this problem with Harry, and that this idea that he can't tell his best friend what happened because he'll lose his friend. And so all of that are psychological reasons, and that's interesting, and it just manifests itself in web impotence.
But even, I mean, yeah, web impotence obviously is like one of them, but also, and this is very clear when you're watching the movie, at least to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm overreading that. Whenever he's swinging through the city, a lot of that is like emotional release.
Yeah,
swinging. Right. But the movie doesn't come out and say it.
No, yeah.
But you look at the moments of which he just starts swinging around the city for pretty much no reason. It's like, well, it's because psychologically he needs to do this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting as well. Like, I could definitely tell this was a movie made in the era of Dawson's Creek and The OC.
That's interesting.
Just in the way they represent young people and their romances.
Yeah, right.
That montage of them going to the theater with the acoustic guitar track.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, yeah, it's right in that zone, isn't it? Of that's what they're leaning into, and I'm glad. I think that's a good choice. It's a story about young people. It should reflect the kind of teen TV drama that's out there, covering those kinds of subjects. Right. And then later on in the movie, it gets very Nora Ephron, Mike Nichols. So romantic comedy as a genre is like a huge part of this film. And I think I like that they don't shy away from that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very smart.
Well, and that's the thing is that
like, because this is it's like a previously this has been a genre about rugged masculinity, right?
Well, I was just gonna say, because this
movie's not.
Yeah, the one thing that Raimi's able to do is deftly kind of combine different genres in that way.
Yeah, completely. And obviously, he's come from specifically a horror film background, and he's definitely.
But I think that's also what works for the comedy, because you've been
and comedy. No, yeah, comedy horror is his wheelhouse.
Yeah, right. And you've been kind of, at least if you've been paying a little bit of attention lately with, say, a movie like Get Out, and just that idea of, with its writer director, being a comedian, and that idea of comedy and horror play in the same way. There's tension. You're waiting for something to happen, either the punchline or the stabbing.
Definitely, yeah.
And so when you have that background, you can work within those two things. They're partnered in a way that people, I don't think, normally think of.
Definitely, and also, that old adage about you the key to comedy horror is make the comedy as funny as possible and the horror
Right.
as scary as
Yeah.
possible. And we have sustained sequences of broad physical comedy,
Right.
and then
But a Sam Raimi or a
sequences,
Jordan Peele, they get that. They understand it.
sequences of pure horror.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of
Uh,
my notes. That's actually one of my next notes, because when that whole thing happens, there's real visceral violence happening in that room, but without
yeah,
any
the
blood.
well,
His wife is dying,
mhm.
but you still have that kind of, Sam Raimi's bringing that comic book action with the sort of CGI glass falling down and
Yeah.
her reflection in it. I mean, it's one of those things that's done with a touch that is, you know, he's able to make you kind of cringe, but without any actual on-screen violence scene.
Yeah, the villain transformation scene, the way that it's designed and filmed and acted, it gives it a real, for want of a better term, Cronenbergian
Yeah,
feel.
I had the same thought when the needles go into his back. I felt that.
Because and the distinction for me is it's like viscerally stylish, but it's not cartoonish.
Mm-hmm.
Like and this is something that I think we've mentioned before. Raimi is very good at showing the visceral impact, however stylized
Mm-hmm.
his filmmaking is. You still feel it viscerally. And the biggest shock for me is like early on in the film, where Peter's going to his class and he falls down and people continue to walk
Yeah.
back and forth across him and his face gets slapped to one side. And I'm just thinking about, like, obviously it's slapstick, but it's like it feels like you're being knocked about as a viewer.
Right.
And it's like a small moment like that can have that kind of visceral
One of
impact.
those students was Sam Raimi, by the way.
Oh, even better. So knew
He knew
exactly
what
how
he
to
was
kick him in
doing.
the
Yeah,
face.
exactly.
And it's the same thing here. Like you don't lose the sense of what's physically happening, but it is extremely stylized and beautifully designed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I said Cronenbergian, because that's what I associate with
Sure.
you never lose a sense of the art and the the physical reality at the same time, and also the reflection of a screaming face
Yeah.
in an eye and in a shard of glass. I mean, that reminds me of Louis Brunel's surrealist films
Mm.
and Alfred Hitchcock's
I was gonna say Hitchcock.
horror
Yeah.
films. So I mean, that's just the prelude to what I think is the most Raimi-esque sequence in the whole film, which is the operation
Right.
scene. And I mean, his mastery of schlock horror just gets full reign
Oh, it's
for a few minutes. It's
it's
this in your
amazing.
face action body horror.
That includes
But
like octoarm vision.
yeah, and visually and tonally, it's like a cutscene from Evil
It
Dead
it
2.
really is.
And this
Yeah.
is even before you see the chainsaw.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I was gonna.
The chainsaw seals the deal, but and so I'm in absolute awe of that sequence being in the middle of this kind of big budget mainstream,
Mm-hmm.
let's say family oriented
Yeah, but that's the
superhero
thing, because
movie.
it's family oriented. But
Yeah,
you know, like a dozen innocent doctors get killed in that scene.
yeah,
You know.
it's absolutely stunning, and then to sort of end it with the button of the
Mm-hmm.
Frankenstein entrance. It's like it's also playing with different traditions of horror. So you've basically had
Right.
something that looks like it could have been in
Well, and
Evil
like I
Dead
said
2.
earlier, with the effects team watching that scene, I mean, there's practical and CGI going on, but those
Yeah,
arms feel really alive. And
yeah,
that
and
goes a
then
long way to what makes at least this character within this movie work.
yeah, and then the way that the character from this point onwards, having had this extremely schlocky transformation and operation
Mm-hmm.
scene, we go into like a more conventional but nonetheless very well executed universal monster
Yeah,
narrative.
right.
That's really nice, really nicely done on both ends, and it takes a director like Sam Raimi to be able to negotiate both. Not to mention that he's not really doing a horror movie. He's just adding horror to a
Right,
totally different
exactly. Yeah.
genre of filmmaking, which is, to your point, that's pretty phenomenal that you can have all of that in the same movie.
Hmm.
Um, and I can't, I like that Sam Raimi's corny sometimes.
No, I agree.
Like some
Yeah,
of his visuals are really
they
corny,
are.
like
Yeah.
the dream and the water fade. I'm like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like that could have been in a Lifetime movie.
absolutely.
But it's like I don't mind that he likes to have fun visually in this rather superficial
The
way.
reason I never mind it is because almost always when he's doing it, he can do it and make it good. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? So, like you
yeah.
said, when you're seeing something that could be in a Lifetime movie, except you're enjoying it, it makes you enjoy it even a little bit more because you respect it a
I
little bit more because it shouldn't work as well as it does.
but I also like because we know it's his wheelhouse. We're talking about these two scenes that he's able to do so well. These self-consciously horrific sequences. I gotta say, I'm just as impressed by what he does with the action sequences in terms of editing
Oh man.
and movement within the frame. It
Yeah.
achieves an almost balletic quality,
Mm-hmm.
which I just think is again, and it's like the antithesis of what he does with comedy because it's all about editing and it's all about moving the camera within the shot.
Yeah.
So he just shows this remarkable command of what I would say is a filmmaker totally different skill sets. And yet it still comes out as it still feels like the same Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
But you can't but what he's doing, he's got his fingers in very different pies.
Mm-hmm.
But
But
he's
the other
doing it
thing that
all with an imagination and skill.
yeah, the other thing I respect a lot, because we're right about there now, I think, anyway, there are set pieces in this movie. But when the
Oh
set
yeah.
pieces show up, they show up at a time that makes sense, that
Yes.
doesn't ruin the flow of the movie, that feel like they belong. And then on top
Yeah.
of that, they're great set pieces. This robbing of the bank
Yeah.
and then the fight with Aunt May and up on the side of the building. This is what I remember seeing the movie, seeing the movie in the theater. I remember thinking they came such a long way in just 2 years.
Oh wow, yeah.
That fight on the building specifically with the vertigo involved and the constantly falling down and coming back up. But still, like you said, there's a pace and a pace to it. There's editing in a way that is, I think, it's interesting for a movie like this at that time that this is when this movie is almost working at its best in some ways, and other movies could never even come close to it. Not
Yeah,
at
and
that time.
I think no, and the key to it is making those tough decisions to sort of cut away
Yeah,
from
right.
the spectacle, right? I mean, the image of you almost get into CGI sky fighting,
Mm-hmm.
but then Raimi cuts away just at the right time
Yeah.
because before it becomes either unconvincing or boring or both.
Yes.
And we go to something else, even something as simple as like an old lady with hanging
on
with
with an umbrella. Yes.
Yeah. Which is the Batman 66 of it all, and the screaming big boob blonde.
Right.
It's like it's about it's a consciousness of
There's one thing.
the
Sorry,
effect.
go ahead.
The effects work for us. We don't work for the
Yeah,
effects.
exactly. But within it, there's one part of that fight that always reminds me that we're telling a mini story
Yeah.
within
yeah,
this
absolutely.
fight, and it when the clock hands come off and they're split in two, and Spidey slings them back at them, and it sort of hits next to Doc Ock's head while he's still
Yeah.
holding Aunt May. There's a story kind of telling arc and editing within that really reminds me that we're dealing with people that are doing this at the highest level.
Yes.
That
And also, like it's it's actually it's a kind of crucial story point because he he abandons
his grandmother as Peter Parker, yeah.
as Peter Parker he abandons his grandmother in order to be Spider-Man, and this is called out even within the family. It's Joel McHale who calls
Yeah,
who calls it
right,
out.
right. It's a good little cameo, right? Again,
Yeah,
deep bench.
Another part of the deep bench. So it's actually important, and that will the problem is we'll just keep reiterating the same story point because it's a Michael Chabon script, but that's the second act, really, isn't it? It's like which one of these identities is Peter gonna adopt?
Right.
He has a very specific choice, and this is our first glimpse of the kind of conflict. And one of the things that I like thematically about this film is, and what it does really effectively, it calls into question the heroism of heroes and the villainy of villains.
Yes.
So you have that going
Right.
on both sides, because Dr. Octopus we see him as a man first, and he's fighting off becoming a villain, and Peter's doing the same thing with heroism from the other side.
Yeah.
And to me, that's, we don't get into other Spider-Man movies, but to me, that's way more dramatically effective than what they do with No Way Home, with trying to redeem the villains through science.
Mm-hmm.
Just the idea is like you have a solid basis of a character. You build that from the ground up.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting for the third act to show the humanity of the villain.
Mm-hmm.
It's way more interesting.
I agree.
Because you can follow that
arc.
Follow through the whole film, and you always know that they're a complex human being full of internal conflict.
Well, and I'm pretty sure you said this off air. It helps when you have Alfred Molina.
It helps. Well, that's it. And what I was really struck by, I kept waiting for the moment in which his performance changes.
Mm-hmm.
But it never does.
Yeah, right.
Like the character that you see in the first scene is the way he plays it all the way through the film. So there's no... He doesn't transform into anything. He's just fighting off bad impulses within him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just really interesting, and it is why you need a strong actor like
Alfred Molina, right?
Because he has to carry it all. He has to do that all by himself. Nothing is going to help him do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the many masterful performances in the film, and obviously coming after a showboating performance like Willem Dafoe in the last film, you're giving people an entirely different performance and an entirely different character slotted in.
So in that way, it's an inversion, yeah.
It's an inversion, but it's a really successful one.
Mm-hmm.
Really successful.
I always like too that Sam Raimi always manages to get someone to look down the barrel of a camera and scream.
Yeah,
it goes back to that corny idea.
But there's also he loves that zoom in to
right,
that zoom into close up, but I love he uses that visual language in quite interesting ways, and one of the ways I really liked was when Doc Ock is approaching, he'll have the camera when you hear him approach,
right. That's later in the movie when he's
you have the camera zooming in every time he gets closer and closer. It's a really
I love that
interesting way to do that, and he's off screen as well.
Right,
but it's the same.
But again, it goes back to that visceral
camera work. Yeah,
right.
Just using camera work to do something that it would take a lot of work to actually put on screen.
And then it's right around this point, right, where he decides to stop being Spidey.
Yeah, I mean, they
and we go into the music montage. We go into
2000s
raindrops keep falling on my head.
Early 2000s superhero movies love having their superheroes resign about as much as Sam Raimi loves eye business.
You're not gonna let Batman off the
It's the
hook,
thing. No, but that's it. But this is pre Dark Knight.
right?
You know, this is pre the Dark Knight trilogy. So
And Nolan saw that and thought, "That's an interesting idea." Quitting all
yeah,
the time.
apparently everyone in Hollywood says who was dealing with a legacy franchise was like, I'll
Yeah.
have my hero resign.
But I also like, because it's also in this moment, I think, where he confesses to Aunt May about his guilt over his uncle, over Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
And I like that this movie speaks to the continuity question of the previous movie, in which the audience knows something, but the character has been keeping a secret that pays off a movie later. Because it grounds the movie in a way that I think is important and interesting for a sequel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To carry that secret over and have that be sort of, something he's been dealing with.
Yeah. Without retconning everything that happened in that
Yeah,
moment.
right. Which will happen soon.
Which just happens in the next movie. Yeah, here's another impasse. Uncle Ben comes back from the dead.
Right. Yes, of course.
In what feels like a recap, but is actually a brand new scene.
Yeah. And you can tell because he looks visibly older, even just a couple years later.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this is where I have it's this section of the movie where I began to realize that how much Superman 2 was informing the storyline of this film.
Me too.
Because the Superman 2,
it's all about quitting.
About this time in Superman 2, he decides he doesn't want to be Superman anymore.
Yeah.
And for largely the same reasons.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So they're definitely following in the footsteps of long-held cinematic superhero traditions.
But I think you're right in the sense, because this movie does get weighed down in it a little bit, because there's multiple scenes of him hearing or seeing crime that he's not going to respond to.
Oh, 100%. I think it. I like that. Yeah, I mean the I kind of think the montage, the raindrops montage, is sort of all you really need.
Yeah, right.
And it's fun as well because it's got all this kind of Jack Tati Chaplin-esque, self-aware slapstick in it. And of course, the play within the film is also, they picked the importance of being earnest, in which the main character has a double life. So obviously, that fact, there are no irrelevant pieces of literature in in movies.
Well, it's funny too because there's a moment in this movie where Aunt May's finally leaving the house, and he says, "Hey, what about my comic books?" And she says, "Oh, those awful things."
Yeah, exactly. So it understands just playing with different ends of the cultural spectrum, right? In literature, I felt they got really lucky with the eBay reference.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah,
I was like, that could have dated, but
it didn't.
It hasn't because it's still with us. But they didn't know that. And then I thought there was like a bit of unintentional Curb Your Enthusiasm when Spider-Man's walking away from a mugging.
Yeah.
It was just like I wanted.
It felt very last episode of Seinfeld.
Exactly. I wanted him to turn to camera and say, "Oh, that's a shame."
Yes, exactly. But then because speaking to the weighing down, it's this movie has a callback because now we have a second fire scene, which is in the first movie.
Yeah, and it's not just that. I mean, I'd forgotten about that, but it's also a self-consciously hokey setup, right? Mm-hmm. It's like it's a plan. It's a setup before. Or did it turn out to be a setup?
No, well, in the first one, I thought you meant like a setup for him choosing to be Spider-Man again.
Oh.
In the first movie, it's
Oh,
a setup. The goblins in the house to attack. It's
but
not
in
in
this
this
one it
movie.
isn't.
No, not in
Oh,
that way.
okay.
No.
But I definitely thought that was what it was going to be. So it surprised me in that sense.
Okay.
But it had, because it's directed by Sam Raimi. Feels like it has real stakes, even if it doesn't necessarily. But yeah, you could absolutely do without it.
Right.
Like a lot of stuff in the second act just doesn't. It can be done way more efficiently and with fewer scenes. I think.
Now we haven't given much.
It's not a short movie.
No,
It
yeah.
doesn't feel necessarily overlong, but it's not a short movie.
No, yeah.
It's a full 2 hours.
2:12, I think.
Oh, I think the next one is 2:12. I think this is like
No, the next one's like 2:20.
Oh dear.
Maybe this one's 2:07. I forget.
And also just some it just feels like they lose their writing faculties a little bit in this section in a number of ways. The scene where Peter's talking to himself in his apartment, I thought, well, the neighbor's about to come over and have this conversation with you anyway, so do we need him talking to himself?
Right.
Like, we don't need to double up, right? It's one or the other, really.
Yeah.
But I suppose, if I was Michael Chabon trying to mount a defense, I'd say that this section's all about tying up loose ends.
Maybe.
But I don't think that's justification enough for how long it takes and how deep into the weeds we get with some of this stuff.
Yeah, all right. I'll agree with that. Let's tie off this end. Take another break.
Also, we know Spider-Man's going to come back in the third act, so
yeah, that's a given.
It's a little insulting. It's a little insulting to our intelligence to have to wait so long for that revelation.
Heard.
Anyway.
Yeah, I get it. We're on the same page, I think, on that one.
Yeah.
I think maybe there's so much. There's enough for me to enjoy in this sort of overbloated second act that it doesn't tear down the movie too much for me.
Yeah.
But you're not wrong. All right. Let's come back and then we'll finish up. Right after this, everyone. If you like podcasts like I do, boy, do I have a treat for you. You need to
stay on target
and check out the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Listen as your host, sound designer and music creator Tony Parham, and co-host, musical performer and sound lover Derek Hansen, D-Rock if you're nasty, and I am, discuss all things sound related to film, television, stage, and theatrical productions. They discuss environmental sounds, bioacoustics, dialogue, the nature of communication through sound, but as an added bonus, they drink beer and try to
stay on target.
Find them wherever you get your podcasts and listen to the pure mania of a man who can charitably be described as Doug, the dog from Up, and another man with a soothing and sultry voice trying to get that man to
stay on target.
That's the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Tune in and listen to the sounds they are creating just for you. We're back once again. Tom and I are here to finish up with Spider-Man 2, the 2004 sequel to Spider-Man.
That's right. Couldn't be clearer.
Couldn't be any clearer than that. So now, I mean, we're in this section of the movie. We're almost to the third act. He's thrown the costume away. We have kind of we have good fun bits with J.K. Simmons again because he's got the suit and all of that. And
yeah, we see that. We get the moment in a J.K. Simmons performance where you see the humanity of the character just for a second.
For a brief moment.
Where and then he goes back to being the worst human being in the world.
I love that.
Then in Whiplash, it's at the very beginning where he's doing his first rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
he's going, I want it a little faster, just a little. It's a little too
Yeah.
a little too
Not quite my
a little
tempo.
too slow for me. Yeah, no, that's it. Not quite my tempo, like that. And then within seconds, he's throwing drumsticks at him.
I actually was rewatching that movie recently, and I thought of you because, you know, it felt like your Yoda argument.
I was like, hey, he got it. He got that drum solo out of him in the end.
He did.
Speaking of J.K. Simmons, his performance in Burn After Reading is one of the. It literally, I can't think of any other films where one performance has saved an entire movie.
Yeah, because I don't like that movie on the whole.
No, I don't like it at all. When he comes on screen, suddenly everything makes sense.
Yeah. I also, I
I
couldn't.
He's the only part of the movie that is like, once he comes on screen, you go, oh, I get what this movie's about now. I get the tone of this movie.
Right, yeah.
I did not know what the tone of this movie was until he came on screen.
I strangely found myself unable to forgive that movie once they killed Brad Pitt.
Sure.
It seems so mean.
But in what is essentially a cameo in that film,
yeah,
he salvaged an entire movie's worth of unsuccessful storytelling.
We're not talking about that movie, though. We're talking about...
We are talking about J.K. Simmons.
Yeah.
In one of his best performances.
Yeah, exactly. And he's one of those actors. And we discussed it before, but this movie gets the most out of everybody. Everybody that's in it. I mean, when Elizabeth Banks is, that far down on your bench, you're having you got yourself some good actors.
Yeah, and I think one of the best choices in the film that really prevents it becoming from too sappy.
Mm-hmm.
When we get to the wedding,
yeah,
it's all through his perspective.
Right. Yes, exactly.
One of the best moments of the film for me is when we're tracking down the aisle
towards the astronaut, and he steps in.
His head just peers into view, and then the rest of the film is all through his perspective. The rest of the scene's all his perspective.
Yes.
And I thought, what a brilliant choice.
It's great.
And he's barely in the next movie, and I think that's a big part of the problem.
Exactly. Hey, I was going to ask you, though, there's this scene where, Peters talks to the doctor, and then he wants, he's kind of decided he wants to get his groove back.
Yes.
And he's going to do that with a very risky test but you have that slow motion run.
Mm-hmm.
So do you hate it because of the slow motion? I think it's shot so interestingly, though, by Sam Raimi.
Yeah. No, I mean, if there's someone I trust with slow motion, it's Sam Raimi.
All right.
He's got cinematic technique under his control. And then we go into real time at the end of that with him going, my back.
I love it too. Because
and
as he's going through the air, he's so happy and he says, I'm back, I'm back, baby. And then he of course falls down. Ugh, yeah. My back. It's
and again,
stuff.
They're good. It's a good example of undercutting the grandiosity of your heroes.
Sure.
I mean, there's a great scene earlier on where he's dragging a bicycle behind him.
Yeah. Yes.
Which could have been... I mean, I don't know if it's a reference to a Buster Keaton movie, but it could have been straight out of The General or something. And I love that that's our hero. It's he's in that Buster Keaton mold.
Well, and I also found it really interesting.
Neither too idealized nor too unlikable.
Yeah, right.
It's the perfect balance.
Well, I found it interesting because I had referenced earlier where the first movie ends and his decision, and then they sort of pose that question again, but in a way that makes complete sense for the characters, the arc they've had through this movie, where he and Mary Jane are talking, and she flat out asks him, "Do you love me?" And he has to lie to her a second time. And it has just as much dramatic effect in that moment for me as it does at the end of the first movie. That's great.
That is, yeah. That's a really.
And part of that is Sam Raimi, because he's got like a slight push in, and the actors are giving some really good acting because, and we've talked about this before, just generally about film,
Yeah.
regardless of sequels, but when you're allowing an actor to show you what they're thinking instead of just always saying what they're thinking,
Oh, yeah.
you know, that goes a long ways, and that's a great moment for that moment.
I wanted to ask you about something which I'm just interested in knowing your thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm.
The 9/11 of it all. Like, how much is that? I mean,
I thought about that, but only in reference to how much it wasn't on my mind as I watched this movie. Because it doesn't.
What about the L train sequence?
Mm-hmm.
With all the doughy New Yorkers standing up for Spider-Man. I thought that was a definite 9/11 reference.
I guess I equate it more just to, because it happens in the first movie too.
Right, and I think it's a callback.
And that's right.
That.
It's so I guess I was thinking in terms of a callback, but to me.
But that was about 9/11 too.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's certainly a reference. Like, I always took it as sort of the resiliency of the people of the city, which of course has something to do with 9/11. But even going back to, what was it, 93 with the bombing in the,
absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's not, I guess it wasn't an overt thought to me, but upon reflection, yes, of course, I always think of it about the resiliency of the city and sort of who they'll stick up for. But that plays into 9/11, obviously.
And I think about it, what happened off screen with the original Spider-Man basically losing its ending because of 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And how, it had to make those big changes. And so I wonder whether there is like an attempt to process that in this film.
Maybe.
They go big in this sequence, they go big on the Christian imagery as well.
Yeah.
And they're carrying Spider-Man. I say again, like, something about the early 2000s and labored Christian imagery in superhero movies. Man, I can't get enough of it.
And it's funny too, because throughout the entire series, including the first movie, there seems to be a fetish with, showing his face.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
there's always got to be an explosion that takes off half that mask.
the same specific parts of that mask,
right?
As well,
yeah,
which is
seems to be the weak point of the sewing.
I was gonna, rebuild that mask in a way that part doesn't immediately come off with any trauma. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess it's another sort of Marvel point of distinction that the secret identity doesn't really matter quite as much.
I love the moment where the one guy on the train says, "Jesus, he's just a kid."
Jesus, he's just a kid. Yeah, I like what I kind of like about that scene is it's a plausible reason as to why those people would keep it to themselves.
Yeah,
because they don't want to admit to themselves that they're idolizing a teenager.
Sure, yeah.
And that made total sense to me. But I also like, obviously, if you're comparing this to Superman 2, they walk the reveal of the secret identity back with the date rape kiss.
Yeah.
But there's none of that here.
No.
That's good.
And that's a good thing, yes.
When someone learns who Spider-Man is,
but just chooses
they know it forever.
Not to reveal it.
They choose not to reveal it, but certain characters learn his identity and they factor it into the ongoing
And you know what's
line.
interesting that I'm only thinking about right now in this moment is the idea of maybe you couldn't get away with that in the new iteration of Spider-Man because of where we are in culture right now. Everybody's an investigative reporter with their phone, and we seem to have this.
Well, that's kind of what happens in No Way Home. The end of whatever the second Tom Holland one is,
right.
and the beginning of No Way Home. that he gets, revealed that he gets
Right.
outed on social media, and yeah, I think that's probably a part of it. Although that I think Iron Man 2 is the one I think of where he stands up at the press conference and just
No,
says
that's
it
the
because
end of
he's
Iron
tired.
Man, the first one.
Oh yeah, he's just tired of it.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
it's tiresome. It's a tiresome convention, and that's the way it seems in that movie.
But it's all
And
just
I think
very
it's a little
Tony
bit the
Stark
same
to
here.
say, yeah, I'm him.
Yeah, but I think there's a similar thing here of like, we gain more from certain people knowing that it's Peter Parker than we do from trying to keep it a secret artificially.
But I also think we're kind of burying the lead because I love this train fight.
Yeah,
I think it's so much fun.
What? Yeah, I think it's fun. I think it starts off. We start off seeing something that we've seen before, and it starts to feel a bit repetitive when it's just the two of them fighting in midair.
Yeah.
And then we shift to this train section, which is so vibrant, it's almost nauseatingly so.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Constant movement. And yeah,
I think my note was like the effects go to another level, even within this movie.
But again, like Raimi is still playing impact on the body in a way that Marvel just doesn't do now. Like it never feels this. What's happening to Peter at the front of that train?
Yeah.
You never get that now. You never feel that kind of physical threat to the characters in the way that you feel.
No, yeah.
So that's what really, hugely impressed me.
And it still stands out, that idea of, I think it's amazing what Sam Raimi is able to do, because you understand what's happened to his body, that the chemistry is different, that there's some, he can be knocked into bricks and that kind of shit. But the toll that it took to stop that train and the ripping of the sleeves, it's visceral in a way. And again, even with just Tobey Maguire and his acting, all of it comes together in a way that's like really super compelling.
So it looks like Sam Raimi's blowing like a maximum power leaf blower in his face.
Yes, right.
Because he's going into that Richard Nixon re-entry.
Yes,
from The Simpsons.
From The Simpsons, right.
And again, it's like that's something that CGI simply can't do for you in a way that makes you feel it in your bones. And so choosing to emphasize the threat on the body.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess if you come from a tradition of body horror, it's second nature to you, but it's not second nature to the people who made Marvel movies after
this, yeah. Well, and speaking to choices made, because we have this bit, the whole reason that Doc Ock shows up is because he's going to take Spider-Man to Harry.
Yeah.
Because he's figured it out. By the way, he should have figured it out way sooner. I mean, when Peter disappears at Doc Ock's thing and Spider-Man shows up 10 seconds later, 1 and 1 do equal 2, but I'll put that aside for now.
Yes.
But the choice that this movie makes to have a complete arc for Harry that kind of ends not on the very last scene, but at the very end of this movie, that is going to happen in the next movie. Restraint is what I'm talking about, because the next movie has no restraint in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. And so I just like that, it gives it weight. You feel, even though that Harry's wrong, you're not siding with him, but you understand his anger.
Yeah, and it's again, it's that sort of it reminds you that you're telling a story throughout these 3 movies,
right,
rather than just that there are some storylines that come and go, and then there are some that are carrying all the way through, and this is one that sets up like a next generation villain that is also looping back to the original film.
I'm starting to think, like, because this is a trilogy, so This is the
Yeah.
middle part of a trilogy. This is another really good middle part
It
of a
is,
trilogy.
yeah. The choice to just kind of like leave that as a tease,
Yeah, right.
is very good. But to sort of give you a satisfyingly, because this is also a romantic comedy,
Mm-hmm.
and to give us like give us the When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah, sure.
Well, it gives us The Graduate, and then it gives us When Harry Met
Yes,
Sally.
yes.
It's like Rob Reiner's original ending for When Harry,
When Harry
Met
Met
Sally,
Sally, right.
of them not getting together and then they get together. Yeah. And then in the final shots of the film,
The battle, you mean? Like the last with Doc Ock, or
yeah.
are you talking after the wedding?
After the wedding, I mean, I really,
Because to me, this is as good an ending as the first movie. The go-getter tiger, but like just the right kind of ominous music as she watches him leave. You have a sense that, there will be a toll on the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we should say that projecting a storyline into the next movie is done really well, but also wrapping up what happens with Octavius is done very well.
Yeah,
and I love the line "I will not die a monster" because he's. It reminds you he is a universal monster. He's a tragic figure.
Mm-hmm.
And all those what characterized those monsters from villains, at least to me, was that they all had a tragic element of self-loathing.
Right.
It's like even King Kong. It's like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
All the way down to that, but certainly.
Well, I also
the Creature and the Mummy and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They didn't want to be what they were.
Right? Yeah, exactly. They didn't relish it,
and that's what Octavius is going through.
And what else I also loved is there's an acting moment within that when he gets knocked around a little bit, and all of a sudden he's himself again. He's Otto.
Yeah.
And Peter Parker, he comes down and he sees Spider-Man, but of course the mask is obliterated. So he says, Peter Parker. And the surprise on his face when, he even says what he had referenced before, smart but lazy.
Yeah.
I just a really, again, like having Alfred Molina.
Yeah.
Because then you get into that moment where it's like you said, you can pity the monster.
Yeah,
because he's not choosing it.
And he never really was a monster.
Yeah, right.
Well, which is other interesting thing about the characterization.
Yeah.
It was just literally struggling against the worst aspects of his personality, which were always there.
Yes, right.
Which is just a more interesting story.
But going back to that first scene when he first meets Peter, because that's a part of it.
It is, absolutely.
You can see in his performance, his hubris, that kind of God complex thing that you have in doctors or scientists that are doing something important.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Yeah. And those, I think as you were saying, those final shots, we have a nominally happy ending, and then those final shots without.
Oh, before we get there, because I just have a note, I just want to say I also like when the side of the building falls down and he gets underneath it. I love when he's looking at her and just says, "This is really heavy." That's a very solid joke.
Like walking back some of that euphoria.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Like an ambivalent look from MJ.
There's that sense of what it's going to do. Yeah. And their relationship is just beginning.
And that really takes the edge off the CGI helicopters.
Yeah.
Because there's no way. There are no good CGI helicopters.
It's my second.
The only good CGI helicopter is not a CGI helicopter.
It's my second to last note after the ominous MJ looking. But I just wrote.
And that also.
All bad CGI helicopter, or all CGI helicopters are bad CGI helicopters.
But that's not what you draw. But because the movie's well directed,
you're
not drawn to that. You're thinking about MJ, and you're also thinking about how it keeps the story open for
Yeah.
another for another phase of their story. I mean, it's you know, I think the character is well written and played. There are certain kind of limitations which I think are about representation, and
Mm-hmm.
we just don't see the potential for women to play an active role in stories like this,
Right.
even as recently as 2002. And I think, you know, the fact that this movie there's a scene in this movie where Kirsten Dunst is tied to a pole, screaming, unable to do anything except be rescued.
Yeah.
With you know, essentially like with water drenching her, so you can see
So you can
the
see
outline of her
outline
breasts,
of a
and it's like,
nipple, right? Yeah.
it's like that representation wouldn't and shouldn't pass today.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of correction of that in the next film, which I think is fascinating, because it's definitely the weaker film and the weaker representation of MJ. But this film feels more limited as to what.
No,
you
yeah,
can
I get
do
what
with
you mean,
female
for sure.
characters. Yeah, especially when your only other female character is really Aunt May.
Yeah, Aunt May, and
yeah, who
maybe the
I was
actor
gonna-
she works with on The Importance of Being Earnest, who I think you see later at the wedding, but you know,
yeah,
with almost
And,
no lines. That's
and Elizabeth Banks.
yeah, that's true.
But yeah, and Aunt May is not going to pass the Bechdel test with the amount that she talks about
Right.
Uncle Ben. Right? She's not getting
no
out of that.
Bechdel test passing for
she's
Aunt
not
May
passing
on this
that
one.
Bechdel
No.
because there's too much Uncle
It's all
Ben
she fucking
coming out of
talks
her mouth.
All right.
But that and some of the racial stuff that also, you know, that
Sticks in
leaves
your
a bit
craw.
of taste in
Yeah.
my mouth. But that's about the time in which the film is made, not
Yeah.
the film itself.
Yeah, I agree. Now, well, first, anything left for you? Any lingering notes?
No, I think no, not necessarily. No.
What about a credit check?
Well, of course. Web design. Simple, stark, effective graphic to end the film. I love the way it's kind of reminiscent of the older black and white comics.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a really nice choice. Like both the title sequence and this got some amazing graphic design choices.
I agree.
And I love the fact, I don't know if this is a superhero specific thing, but I love the descriptive credits. Things like amazed kids.
Yeah, right.
This leaves nothing to chance for the audience or maybe the person in the role finding where they are in the credits.
Right, because it also, but it harkens back to sort of Airplane.
Yeah,
the,
that's what,
you
like,
know,
I don't know how, like, where
when they're
does the convention
the
come
lines that
from?
they say. Yeah.
It's like instead of man 1, man 2, woman 1.
Yeah.
It's like woman shouting at supermarket.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
it's like kind of. It's like, oh well, that must be me.
Yes.
So I'm the only one shouting at a supermarket in this film.
Yeah, the guy who said, you know, stop cupping her breast. You know, followed by who said that?
Yeah, well, it's the Naked Gun where they just
Naked
have the
Gun.
line of
Yeah, it's
dialogue
Naked
they
Gun.
say.
You're right.
They just have the dialogue.
That's the dialogue they say. Yeah.
Which I mean, that really is going above and beyond.
Look out!
I think. Now, I despise Michael Bublé.
Well, add it to the list of people you hate. Fuck.
I agree with Steve Coogan when asked where do you stand on Michael Bublé, to which he replied, on his windpipe, preferably. But let me tell you, I'd be happy to have that big band Spiderman theme played all the way through the credits instead of that whiny emo rock.
Yeah.
Period specific.
I have that
nonsense.
I have that note for both of these films.
Just like, ugh. It's like, I know it's the music of the time and these are teenagers, but
Stop.
You've got a big band. You've got a big band version of Spider-Man to play with. Do it, just
do it.
What a great ending.
Do it.
That's all I have.
Done.
All
right then, sir.
Spider done.
Yeah. Spun your last web.
Hey, there you go.
No, you haven't spun your last web, because next we'll be talking about Spider-Man 3.
And it is a web.
Oh, I'll say.
Oh, but we're drowning in gossamer.
But first, ladies and gentlemen, you'll have to tell us what you think of Spider-Man 2. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter to let us know. Send us an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com to tell us your feelings. That's it for us on Spider-Man 2. We're fans. This is a good movie.
Yeah. Cautious fandom.
You save your real riotous fandom for Superman 3.
Yeah, like any reasonable human being.
I mean, Spider-Man 2, it's okay, but it's no
it's
Richard Pryor falling off the 80 stories on skis, let me tell you.
It's no getting a blowjob at the Statue of Liberty. Talking about sucks with Robert Vaughn. Come on.
All right. That's it for us, ladies and gentlemen. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, Michael Shantz here of the How Dare You Awards. You heard me. Up next, Spider-Man 3. Say goodbye to everybody, Tom.
If you have an extraterrestrial's head in there, you're the third guy this week.
You should make them all from him.
I know. It's
hard
it's
not
tempting to. There, I mean, most of them are either setups or punchlines, though. There's not actually that many of that are like quotable in that sense. It's all about the patter.
Yes.
I forgot to mention as well, like those newsroom scenes.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you really remember that Sam Raimi co-wrote the Hudsucker Proxy.
Yeah.
Because all that patter is timed to perfection.
Delightful.
Yeah.
Trust my barber. So long, everyone.